Hi, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about social cognitive learning theory or social cognitive theory. And you'll see I've got screenshots there from Bandura's famous Bobo doll experiment. We'll talk a little bit about what impact that had on psychology and where it all fits in. Oops. So what I want to be really clear about with Bandura's representation of social cognitive theory, particularly when he first introduced it into the field, is that he expanded behaviorism by saying there were additional mechanisms of learning available. What that means is Bandura didn't say, well, there's no such thing as operant conditioning or classical conditioning doesn't exist. That was not Bandura's point at all. He also didn't suggest that in any way that social cognitive theory provided a better explanation for learning. What he says is that there are more than one way things get learned. There's more than one way that things get learned. And social cognitive theory was explaining that we need a more inclusive and encompassing representation for learning. So this came out in the late 50s when he was first publishing about this. And at that time, that was Skinner's heyday. And Skinner was very much clear that there was just there's behaviorism, and all learning is essentially behavioral change, and that you had to experience it yourself in order to have learning occur. And Skinner was trying to point out that that's not actually true. And now, of course, we know that you can learn by seeing other folks, but this is the model that explains how that occurs. So anyway, the expansion beyond the existing behavioral theories said that learners can pick up information through what Skinner referred to as vicarious learning. And that is, I can benefit from seeing others receive punishers or reinforcers. I can learn from their experience. And that extends to a representation of learning we refer to as modeling, which is the ability to adopt behaviors or pick up new behaviors or strategies or skills by watching other people do it, even if they're not reinforced. And then one more thing that was critical to this whole approach and really flew in the face of classic behaviorism is something called implicit learning. And what that means is that learning can occur without a change in behavior. And what that does is it breaks apart the performance equals learning representation that Skinner in particular had pushed. Skinner said that, in order for learning to happen, you have to see the behavioral change. Social cognitive theory allows for the fact that I can learn something without ever actually showing you that I learned it. So I've learned lots of behaviors by watching other people do them that I don't necessarily repeat, but I know that they exist. So if I ever really, 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 really want to get on someone's bad side, I've seen other people who do it. I could repeat that if I want to, but I'm just not going to go that route. So some primary theoretical principles underlying the social cognitive theory. This is very basic, very simple theory, really. I want you to think about this is just an expansion of, well, yeah, duh. But anyway, enactive and vicarious learning, those are the two representations of learning that were presented in the social cognitive model. What that meant was enactive learning, it means that's learning that I experience myself because I did it myself. I was in a behavioral learning situation, I did the behavior, and I received the consequence. Vicarious learning, as I said, is I can watch someone else do a behavior, and I can learn from their experience by seeing that they got a reward or got a punishment based on what they did. And the question was, are these different learning processes? And the answer is not really, not necessarily. Because if you represent both of these learning situations as they receive information about the relationship between a behavior and an outcome or a response and a consequence, then they're really the same. It's just that the vicarious learning is by watching it from a third-party perspective. Another primary theoretical principle, and this was a huge disagreement between Skinner and Bandura in particular, is the notion of human agency. And what that means is that humans have the ability to be agentic in their learning situations, meaning they make choice. And you may have seen me discuss in the past about operant conditioning that the current contemporary representations do focus on the reality that particularly humans have a choice to make a behavior. Nearly everybody represents agentic human beings. Now, what that means is we have free will. And Skinner was famous for saying that there is no free will among humans. All they do is respond to the environment around them, that you can make any behavior occur by just changing the environment. And it is a theoretical perspective. People do believe it, but very few people still support that entirely. So the agentic representation, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but you can see the representation. We influence our own functioning, circumstances, and behaviors. We are self-organizing, proactive, self-regulating beings, and we contribute to our own circumstances. We're not merely products of our environment. Now, what this does is this puts a lot more responsibility on the human being. You can't just blame the world around you for your behaviors. And I think that's generally the way most people like to represent human situations. One more big thing with social cognitive theory, and this is a really big switch from, again, the 1950s thinking. Bandura said that we have what we refer to as triadic reciprocal causation, meaning there are three things that are influencing one another, leading to human outcomes and human experiences. He says that we have our behavior and we have our environment. That's consistent with the behaviorist view, that the behavior and the environment work with one another. In Skinner's view, actually, the environment directs what behavior arises. But where Bandura's model gets more influenced, and this is where, again, it becomes more interesting to a psychologist, or particularly a cognitive psychologist like myself, is the person becomes a co-influencing factor in this relationship. And in fact, all three influence one another and can determine the outcomes that we're dealing with. So the person operates on the environment, can change the environment they live in. The person determines their own behavior. The behavior can interact with the individual person factors. There are certain things that I have a behavior I want to do, but I'm simply not able to do because of the person that I am. So those all interact with one another to determine what will come out. And the key point here was to recognize that the person does, or person factors, person variables, my intelligence, my physical construct, my attitudes, my emotions, all have relevance when we're trying to determine what behaviors are likely or what outcomes are likely for a human being. Now, I mentioned modeling before. Modeling is that situation where I see someone else do something and they're teaching me a behavior. A couple of key points: the necessary factors. This is one of Bandura's big things. Very common, popular test question. What are the necessary factors in order for modeling to work? Is the person has to have attention. So I'm the learner. I have to have attention to the model. I have to see what the model did and pay attention to what they're doing. I have to have retention, meaning I retained the steps or the cues that were used by the model. I have to be able to remember all the steps. I also have to have production, meaning I have to have the ability to do what the model can do. So I can watch Michael Jordan dunk a basketball all day long, but I still can't do it the way he did it because I'm not, I'm not as tall as he is. That's my excuse. But that alone could be the reason. And then finally, the fourth thing is you have to have motivation. You have to want to do it. So I can watch people do behaviors, but I don't really want to do them anyway. So all four of those things have to be present for effective modeling to occur. Now, in addition to that, when you want to talk about like the best model, the person that is best for me to watch, there are a couple of things that matter. The model has to be competent and ideally explanatory. I mean, I have to be able to see what's going on from the model. And if it's something that isn't just obvious from a behavioral perspective, they have to have good explanation of the steps that they're employing. Models who are similar to the learner are also better generally because the learner says, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. So if I'm watching Michael Jordan dunk a basketball, well, I can watch it all day, but recognize that, I'm not Jordan. But if I see somebody else who is, also 5'8" and not, or athletically gifted as a pro athlete, and they can do something, then maybe I recognize that I've got the ability to do that same thing as well. Now, in the end, also, the prestige of the model can matter. You see a lot of people do things that they see, important or famous or recognized individuals do more often. So people will copy behaviors or replicate behaviors of prestigious models. And of course, that can be dangerous because you get a lot of these, TikTok challenges that can become, some of them are just silly and funny. Some of them are quite dangerous because of the prestige of the models. So when do we use modeling? Basically, we use modeling anytime we observe a model doing an activity and we try to replicate that situation. You see this often with motor skills. So if I'm learning how to do chores, I watch somebody do it. If I'm watching a coach teach me how to swing a bat or shoot a ball or do whatever. So you see it a lot in sports, crafting, whatever. You can get online and watch someone do knitting, or you go to a knitting class and someone walks you through the steps. So those are behavioral things that you can watch and pick up. There's also something called cognitive modeling, which could be for a behavioral activity. But what happens is, in addition to doing the behavior, they explain what's going on in their mind. So, I'm thinking about this while I do that. Or now pay attention to this. And you're guiding their attention to the most critical thing. Or you can be, like if you're teaching someone how to do a math problem, you say, okay, now I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. And you can explain to them the steps that you're following or what's going through your mind while you're doing it. And the idea is you're teaching them how to think about the problem while you're doing the problem in front of them. And you're giving them good self-regulated keys and strategies, questions to ask oneself while you're doing the activity, things like that. Finally, modeling can also just be simple self-instruction. If you think about it from the perspective of modern, learning with YouTube, right? I fix stuff around the house all the time by bringing up a YouTube video. Hopefully the person that I'm watching is, not crazy and, doing something ridiculous is going to wreck my house. But I watch it, I see what they do step by step, pause it, to catch up, all those kinds of things. That's all using modeling to learn a new behavior. Now, you can't talk about Bandura or social cognitive theory without talking about self-efficacy, because that was his big thing. And basically, I just want to make sure everybody understands what the term self-efficacy means. It's the judgment that you have the talent, time, and tools necessary to complete a task. It's very specific. Yes, I can do that. It's not how you feel about yourself. That's self-esteem. It's not how confident you are in a broad domain of topics. That could be self-concept. It's how well you think you can do something that's right in front of you. So if I put a worksheet of math problems in front of you and say, can you do it? You say, yes, that's your self-efficacy. I could ask you, how well do you think you could do it? You say, well, probably 80%. That's my self-efficacy. The important thing about self-efficacy is the higher that self-efficacy is, the more likely you feel you'll be successful. And that leads to higher persistence. So how do we promote self-efficacy for people? How do we make them have a good self-efficacy, which is tied to all kinds of things? Success in tasks, persistence, confidence, feeling good about yourself. Those all can stem from self-efficacy. Ways we promote self-efficacy for an individual is, first of all, if they have prior performances where they were successful, they will feel more likely to be successful in this situation. Other ways that we promote it is to have what we call messages from others. So praise and criticism, or media influences can also lead our self-efficacy. If I see other people who are way better than me and that maybe makes me think that I'm not as capable as them, that's not great. But if I see people who are like me doing similar things in the media, then maybe I'll have a self-efficacy that is elevated because I see, well, they can do this, surely I can do it too. And then again, I can see the observed successes and failures of others. If I see someone be successful, I think, well, I can do that too. And adopt that through vicarious methods. Now, just a quick preview again, because Bandura was such an influential person, and social cognitive theory is still a key component in our representation. I want to just give you a preview of a couple things we're going to talk about later in the class that come from this as well. The first is self-regulation, which is the ability to monitor, control, and direct your thinking or behavior toward goals. We'll talk about self-regulation later in more depth, but this comes from largely Bandura's influence, where he recognized the ability to reward through vicarious learning, the ability to recognize that, again, that triadic reciprocal relationship where the person, the behavior, and the environment all come together. Self-regulation is using those person factors to regulate my behavior within a given environment. That's basically self-regulation in a nutshell. And that all stems from Bandura's work. Another thing that is very rooted in Bandura's model is the notion of using good goals, which is part of self-regulated learning theories. But I want to mention just real quickly, when you're thinking about these goals, when I set goals for myself in an environment to have specific behaviors, these are the things that make good goals. Are they specific? Are they proximal, meaning they're not too far away from where I am currently? And do they have the appropriate level of difficulty? And if you have something that's way too hard, it makes the goal less likely to be achieved, and you're less motivated to get to it. If you have it's way too easy, then you're like, well, why would I mess with it anyway? Other people refer to these as SMART goals, right? They're specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and quote unquote time bound. Those are, again, we'll get into those more when we talk about motivation theory. And this all, again, stems from Bandura's model. So that is, in a nutshell, the social cognitive theory. As I said, it's still got major influence in psychology and human experience and education in particular, as we exist right now through those various disciplines, or various influences on our discipline with self-regulation, goal setting, self-efficacy, self-concept theory. But it all comes from that original notion that it's not just a relationship between behavior and environment. We got to think about the person in the environment and the person factors in particular. And Bandura, this all generates from Bandura's world. And when he talks about the person, he's not just talking about your intelligence or your physical structure. He's talking about your confidence, your emotions. All those things come together at one time to either change the probability that you're going to engage in something, a specific behavior, or you'll be more motivated, less motivated. Maybe you have the agency to correct an environmental situation you're in. All these things come into play. So that's self-concept in a nutshell. Have a great day.